let me introduce you to our very first storyteller of the night, Steve Edelman. Steve is a sports and entertainment lawyer who focuses on risk and safety at live events. Steve loves what he does so much that he feels like he never works a day in his life. He has been involved with some of the biggest catastrophic injury lawsuits in the event industry, including the 2011 Indiana State Fair stage roof collapse and the 2017 Route 91 Harvest Festival shooting in Las Vegas. In addition to his day job, Edelman is vice president of an international trade association, the Event Safety Alliance, lead author of the authoritative standard for crowd management in the US, and also a law professor at ASU. All of Edelman's work, he says, has two parts: detective and then storyteller. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Steve Edelman.
Thanks, Ruchi. I remember when I met Eminem, the rapper. It wasn't exactly a chance occurrence. I subpoenaed him. He was on stage when a terrible crowd crush occurred just a few feet below him on stage. And I was litigating that case. He wasn't interested in being part of the case. So ultimately, I got a judge to order that he appear for a deposition, but I had to fly to Michigan for the deposition. And this was kind of the high point of my legal career up until then. This was back in 2002 when I was a young lawyer, and I had worked a few fairly interesting cases up until then. Lawyers would find them interesting. Regular people would have just passed out with boredom. So this was different. Now I was going to depose Eminem, and it was going to be cool. So I flew out to Michigan, and the deposition was scheduled to take place in one of these big anonymous office buildings outside of Detroit. And I went there, but I wasn't alone. It wasn't just me. There was a small army of lawyers who traipsed out to this anonymous office building outside of Detroit. There were like a dozen lawyers. Eminem himself had three. And so we all arrive at this anonymous office building and we enter a conference room. That's where depositions take place. It's not in a courtroom. There's no judge, there's no jury. It's just a bunch of lawyers sitting around a conference room table with a court reporter and also a videographer to take down everything. So all of us assemble in this courtroom, in this conference room in the office building in Detroit. And we're all sitting around a long table and we make some nervous chatter with each other for a while. And then we find fascinating things to look at on our otherwise empty notepads. And we're waiting. And we're waiting. Now, this didn't come as a surprise to me. I'd been to enough concerts. I'm kind of used to artists being not really on time. So we're just sitting there minding our own business, all of us lawyers and the court reporter and the videographer. And then I notice a dark spot on the distant horizon down at the far end of the hallway, because we're at one end of the hall and it's a very long corridor. And I see this dark spot moving and it's coming towards us. And ultimately I realize the dark spot is a human wearing a dark suit, a very large human. And he's walking towards us. He walks into our room, and then he walks into our room, into the doorway, stands on one side of the doorway, folds his arms, says nothing. The dozen or so lawyers, the court reporter and the videographer, we say nothing. Now we're waiting for something to happen. We know the action has started to unfold. So we sit there silently. After a while, another dark spot. This one too, at the far end of the horizon, comes closer, closer, closer. We realize it's a second human. This one also wearing a dark suit. This second human enters the doorway, steps to the other side of the doorway, folds his arms, says nothing. Now the tension has risen. The dozen of us lawyers, the court reporter and the videographer, we're not nervously chattering. We're not looking at fascinating things on our notepads. Now we're really locked in to see what's going to happen next. Time passes. Now it's like a scene in an old movie, pages of the calendar flying away into the air. We waited so long. The tectonic plates of the earth shifted, reformed the continents, broke apart again. Dinosaurs landed on Earth, ate all the vegetation, went extinct again. We're still waiting in the conference room. Finally, a third dark spot starts to approach from the far end of the hallway, comes closer, closer. And this dark spot is so huge, it blocks out the sun. This is not merely a man, this is a golem. This is a monster. And he walks into the room and he walks past the first two guys, and behind him, behind this enormous man, is a very small man with kind of blonde, spiky hair, wearing a light blue tracksuit. And we all know who this is, and he confidently strides into the room to the one empty chair at the head of the table, and he sits down and very matter-of-factly just sits there and smiles. And the court reporter, realizing that Marshal Bruce Mathers III has entered the room and the deposition can begin, she raises her right hand, looks at Marshal Bruce Mathers III and says, "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?" And he says, "I do." That's pretty much the last useful thing that Eminem said during that deposition. He's a super smart guy, not saying anything about that. But it turns out that big time artists, important people, they have people to know things for him. And so we were asking him all sorts of operational questions, and he didn't know the answer because it was always someone else who would know. So we didn't actually learn very much from Eminem's deposition. And so later that night, as I was sitting on the airplane going home, I was kind of disappointed, thinking, this was a waste of time. We didn't learn anything. I was wrong about that. Something very important did happen that day in that room. Little did I know that there was a larger purpose to that deposition. And it wasn't anything that Eminem said to us. It's that the deposition happened, that it took place at all. Because in the ensuing months and years, and even now, 20 years later, I had a lot of Eminem. And because that was something that people were interested in, they would say, "Steve, tell us your Eminem story." And I would use that as kind of an entree to actually tell them all the things that I had learned about the way big events get created operationally and then how they're run. And I actually had learned a lot about that. And so I used my Eminem story to kind of backdoor in all the things that I really wanted to talk about. And as a result of telling my Eminem story, over time, people would say to me, "Gee, Steve, you seem to know something about this industry and the way we put on our events. My lawyer doesn't. They just spend time sitting in their office. Maybe you could help me." A practice was born. And so I went from not really having any direction as a young lawyer. I, worked on a bunch of kind of nothing cases. And ultimately, I became a sports and entertainment lawyer, and then a sports and entertainment authority. And now I'm kind of an international big deal about crowd management. And now every so often it happens that when somebody talks to me, they say to their friends afterwards, "I got to talk to someone cool, someone important." And I thought that was always reserved for people like Eminem. So thanks to Eminem, I got one shot, an opportunity that comes once in a lifetime, and I've owned it, and I've never let it go.